The ID card clattered onto the marble floor with a cold, sharp echo that reverberated through the Sterling Financial lobby. Anderson Mitchell, the bank senior manager, had tossed the idea of a black woman in her 60s onto the ground as if it were trash. "Sorry, but documents like these don't inspire any confidence," Anderson sneered, straightening his Italian tie as he watched her stoop to retrieve it. "Perhaps you should find a bank better suited to your profile." Olivia Johnson lingered on her knees for a moment, lifting the card with steady hands that didn't tremble in the slightest. At 60, she carried herself like someone who had faced storms far more formidable than the arrogance of a young executive. As she stood, her gaze met Anderson's with unsettling calm. Other customers were drawn to the scene. An elegant woman whispered to her husband and discreetly pointed toward Olivia. Two men in suits paused their conversation to watch. The lobby was so hushed that even the hum of the air conditioning seemed amplified. Olivia Johnson straightened her coat, slipped the card into her handbag with measured grace, and raised her voice remarkably composed. "Thank you for clarifying how Sterling Financial values its customers." Without waiting for his reply, she turned and walked out of the main hall, her posture both resolute and serene. Onlookers couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and curiosity at her extraordinary poise. Behind her, Anderson stood frozen for a heartbeat, visibly unsettled by her calm. But within seconds, he recovered his swagger, a faint, dismissive smile playing on his lips, as if this had all been nothing more than a trivial, harmless incident. The moment Olivia's figure disappeared through the glass doors, Andrew let out a mocking smirk and deliberately raised his voice as if word the other patrons hadn't heard what just happened. "I just don't get it. Does someone like her really think she can be a client of Sterling Financial? This bank isn't for anyone who strolls in off the street with an outdated ID, cheap clothes, and the nerve to think she's on par with our VIPs. Andrew swept his gaze across the lobby, hungry for approving looks from the more upscale customers. A few politely averted their eyes, pretending not to have heard, while others watched in silence. Whether in agreement or discomfort, it was impossible to tell. "Paula," he turned to his young assistant standing beside him, pride dripping from his tone. "You've been here long enough to know we can't let our bank's elite image be tarnished by clients like that." Paula Evans, just over 30, froze in place. Her eyes cast down toward the marble floor where Olivia had stooped to pick up her ID moments before. In Paula's mind, replayed Olivia's unsettlingly calm, steely gaze as she left the bank. Her heart pounded so fiercely she felt breathless, yet she dared not speak up. Andrew wasn't someone you challenged lightly, especially not an assistant. He was notorious for his domineering arrogance, convinced his instincts were infallible. Seeing Paula's silence, Andrew arched an eyebrow, his voice softening just enough to cut with sarcasm. "You know, Paula, in this high-end banking world, instinct rules everything, and my instinct is always right. That woman clearly doesn't belong here." He straightened his expensive silk tie, satisfied by Paula's obedient quiet. But beneath his confidence, a strange unease was stirring. Not regret, but frustration at his inability to read the older woman as easily as he did every other client. That was rare for Andrew. Since entering private banking nearly a decade ago, he prided himself on sizing up a prospect within seconds. To him, potential meant impeccable attire, costly jewelry, and an unmistakable air of entitlement worn by those born into privilege. So, a simple-dressed older woman like Olivia Johnson was an affront to the standards he held sacrosanct. Clearing his throat, Andrew turned back to the other patrons, smoothly inquiring about their needs, as if to reaffirm his professionalism. Yet in his mind, he kept returning to the image of the black woman he had so publicly dismissed. Meanwhile, outside on the sunlit sidewalk, Olivia paused and drew in a long, steady breath, not to calm herself, but to steel her resolve. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, reflected the strength she'd summoned through countless trials. She reached into her handbag, produced her phone with unshakable certainty, and quickly typed a brief message. "Jessica, I need to talk to you about Sterling Financial. It's urgent." With a tap, the text flew off. Olivia slipped her phone away and lifted her gaze to the clear blue sky. In her expression lay serenity, latent power, and an unspoken promise that Andrew Mitchell's contempt today would cost him far more than he could ever imagine. The moment her message sent, Olivia slipped into the waiting car. The doors closed, enclosing her in a bubble of calm that stood in stark contrast to the tense, stifling air she just endured inside Sterling Financial. Her eyes rested on the glass door, even as her mind turned to a brand new plan, one that would force those who had insulted her into re-examining all their false assumptions. A few neighborhoods away on the 51st floor of the Johnson Global Tower, Jessica Johnson, young, brilliant, and powerful CEO, sat with a senior team, putting the final touches on a $5 billion partnership with none other than Sterling Financial, the very bank that had so deeply wounded her mother. Light from the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated Jessica's face, highlighting the resolve and confidence befitting the head of a billion-dollar enterprise. Her phone buzzed softly. Jessica glanced down to see her mother's text. Surprised, Olivia rarely interrupted her during important meetings. A pang of unease made Jessica signal for a brief pause. She rose and hurried into the hallway, her heart pounding with a strange anticipation. Without hesitation, Jessica called her mother back. After a few rings, Olivia's calm voice answered, though Jessica detected a rare tremor. "Jessica, you need to hear me out. This morning, I went to Sterling Financial to open that business account you recommended. I had the worst, most disappointing experience there." Jessica's brow furrowed. She gripped her phone tighter, her voice urgent yet controlled. "Mom, what happened? Tell me everything." Taking a steady breath, Olivia recounted every detail, from Andrew Mitchell's disdainful attitude and public insult to his arrogant, hostile behavior. Each word cut into Jessica like a blade, tightening her chest with anger and hurt on her mother's behalf. When Olivia finished, there was a long silence on Jessica's end. She stood motionless on the plush carpet of the corridor, but inside her a storm of fury raged. The gravity of the situation was crystal clear. Sterling Financial hadn't just insulted her mother. They'd insulted the values Johnson Global was built upon: respect and fairness. "Jessica," Olivia continued, her voice stronger now, "I'm not telling you this so you'll pity me. I want you to understand how this partner treats real customers, judging someone purely on appearance. Are these really the people you want to entrust with our business and billions of dollars?" Jessica closed her eyes for a moment to steady herself. When she reopened them, her gaze was colder and sharper than ever before. With unwavering certainty, she replied, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle this today. I will never let them humiliate you like that. Never." After hanging up, Jessica remained in the hallway for a long moment, her hands still clenched around her phone. She realized now that the $5 billion deal with Sterling Financial was about far more than business. It was a battle to defend her family's dignity, and she would not let it slip away. Across town, Andrew Mitchell, completely unaware of the undercurrent building against him, remained smug and self-satisfied, convinced that his morning stunt was no more than a trivial hiccup. Soon enough, however, he would be forced to confront a harsh truth. The woman he had just demeaned was the mother of the most important partner of his career, and the price he would pay would be far greater than anything he could imagine. While Jessica stood frozen in the hallway, her resolve steeling for the battle ahead, Andrew Mitchell was casually enjoying lunch with his senior colleagues in the elegant restaurant on Sterling Financial's top floor, his face all light with the satisfaction of wielding absolute power. Seated at the center of a long table draped in crisp white linen, surrounded by co-workers eager to shower him with praise, Andrew slowly set down his glass of red wine and launched into his tale with exaggerated disdain. "You should have seen it," he began, voice dripping with contempt. An elderly woman dressed like she wandered in from rural nowhere walked into our Sterling Financial branch thinking she could open a premium business account with nothing more than her outdated ID. "Guess what I did?" He paused, sweeping the table with his eyes as if expecting his audience to lean in. A few smirked, others raised eyebrows waiting for the punchline. "I threw her ID card on the floor," Andrew declared, deliberately amplifying the drama. "You know, sometimes you have to be ruthless to protect the bank's image and standards. I was just safeguarding Sterling Financial's reputation." He laughed as if he'd just recounted the finest joke. His laughter rang louder than the soft music and clinking crystal, and several at the table joined in, flattering him as though he'd scored some glorious victory. Beside him, Paula Evans sat silently, head bowed, idly twirling her fork through her salad. She felt her stomach churn. Andrew's words stabbed at her like knives. It wasn't the first time she'd witnessed a boss's arrogance and discriminatory behavior, but she'd never felt such disgust as she did now. She could still see the calm dignity in Olivia Johnson's eyes as she bent to retrieve her card from the marble floor. That quiet strength told Paula Andrew was making a grave mistake, one that ran deeper than mere personal offense. Yet, no matter how outraged she felt, Paula dared not speak. She knew Andrew's temperament too well. He accepted no dissent, however mild. Anyone who crossed him ended up quietly leaving the bank. So she remained silent, eyes fixed on a plate, feeling weak and powerless as Andrew's cool, bigoted boasting filled the room. Andrew, fueled by the applause, leaned forward with a smug, scornful gleam in his eyes. Trust me, you can spot a real potential client in seconds. That instinct never fails. That woman clearly didn't belong here. Sterling financial isn't for everyone. We have higher standards. Laughter erupted once more. Andrew leaned back, raised his wine glass again, and drained it like he'd just sealed an important triumph. What he didn't know, and could never imagine, was that his arrogance and overtly racist contempt were about to ignite a major crisis, one powerful enough to strip him of everything he'd ever prided himself on. Outside the restaurant's windows, the once clear sky was gathering slate-gray clouds, as though foreshadowing the storm Andrew Mitchell had himself summoned, and of which he remained blissfully unaware. While Andrew sat back smugly, casually sipping wine with his colleagues in the upscale restaurant across town, Olivia Johnson had arrived at her modest apartment and begun acting with quiet but resolute purpose. Seated at her simple desk, lit only by the soft glow of a battered desk lamp, Olivia opened her laptop. Her reflection on the screen was calm, but her eyes burned with an extraordinary determination. Everyone who knew Olivia assumed she was a humble, gentle woman. Few realized the depth of her past. Long before her daughter Jessica Johnson became the celebrated CEO of Johnson Global, Olivia had been a self-made entrepreneur who overcame decades of hardship, prejudice, and bias to build her own successful business. In her youth, she endured scornful remarks and dismissive glances because of her background and skin color. Yet, she never let anything or anyone stand in her way. Those painful experiences forged in her an unbreakable will, profound self-respect, and an uncanny ability to spot discrimination no matter how well disguised. Now, at her worn laptop, her fingers moved swiftly and decisively. Within minutes, she was deep into files and records she knew would prove what her instincts told her from her first encounter with Andrew Mitchell, that he was not only arrogant, but had a long hidden history of racial bias. She traced his digital footprints across social media, uncovering comments, posts, and seemingly innocuous updates laced with contempt for anyone outside his wealthy circle. Through discreet contacts with his former colleagues, she obtained internal emails revealing Andrew's use of derogatory language in private exchanges, underscoring his obsession with maintaining the bank's elite standards in blatantly discriminatory terms. Piece by piece, the evidence formed a complete picture of the man who publicly humiliated her that morning. Olivia methodically copied every post and email into secure, well-organized folders. Her eyes no longer reflected hurt or disappointment, but the unwavering resolve of someone intent on defending her dignity. When her research was complete, Olivia leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen, even as her thoughts turned to the upcoming meeting with Jessica and the company's legal team. She held in her hands the strongest, most irrefutable proof of Andrew Mitchell's true character and the bank's complicity in his behavior. A latent power, long dormant, stirred within her. Outside her apartment window, the night was settling in, and city lights began to twinkle. But in Olivia's modest room, the only light was her small desk lamp, casting her face in a resolute glow. Sterling Financial and Andrew Mitchell had no idea that their arrogance and bigotry had crossed the path of a one woman who had spent her life battling and triumphing over the very prejudices